Good afternoon. I'm Theresa Skorseth. Robin Hensel is here today. This is Can We Talk, and we're going to start out talking about Islamophobia and some of the ways that it's presenting itself locally as well as nationally and internationally. Robin?
Well, I found it interesting that CARE of Minnesota, that's Council on
American Islamic
Relations, yeah, has developed this new item. It's actually chewing gum, and what it says on the outside of the package is multi-symptom relief for chronic Islamophobia. Islamophobian, it's called. Maximum strength formula treats blind intolerance, unthinking bigotry, irrational fear of Muslims, United States presidential election year scapegoating, spreads love. Take 2 in the morning and call a Muslim. And here,
your neighbor is a terrorist. Hey, how you doing? Hey! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Does your fear of Muslims get in the way of living a normal life? No! Wait, this coming! Did you call anyone? Yeah. We'll take the next one. All right.
Saw the app.
I didn't know. I didn't know. Do you judge people by their outer appearance? Introducing Islamophobia. Now an easy and convenient chewing gum. Starts working within 5 minutes to relieve bigotry and intolerance. Call your doctor if your Islamophobia worsens or you have hallucinations that discrimination isn't real. Side effects include fondness, brotherhood, acceptance, loss of bigotry, increased rationality, and possible denouncement of superiority.
I didn't realize I had a problem, but admitting is the first step.
Islamophobia worked for me. Ask your doctor if it's right for you.
and this is actually available for sale as a fundraiser for CARE. I believe it's $2 a package, and then you have to pay shipping on it. So you can pass this to your Islamophobic, Sharia-phobic friends.
Yeah. Humor is always a good palliative in cases like this.
Right, and so that's, I thought, was a good way to start this segment. And then also to let people know, I found this, actually Colleen Rowley, former FBI whistleblower, sent me this saying that this is kind of like what I did when I founded the Central Minnesota Peace and Diversity Fair. This is from Morton Grove News, and it's dozens attend interfaith peace vigil in Morton Grove.
And that's in what state?
I think it's New York, maybe somewhere out east.
Somewhere out east.
Anyway, a group of students from the Muslim Community Center Academy performed 2 songs at a peace vigil, and it was held at the American Legion Memorial Civic Center in that city. The idea for the vigil was born out of a peace breakfast hosted with religious leaders and government officials. 3 women noted an unfortunate lack of youth participation in interfaith events. And the observation spawned the idea for a peace vigil focused on and featuring the community's youth. And we've often noticed that when we have a peace vigil or a drone protest or anti-war protest of any type, that the youth are lacking, they're missing, they're not there,
Yeah.
for the most part. And that's the component, that's the difference between the peace movement and Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter has got so many more young people that are fueling it and helping it go forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I feel it's important to link those 2 groups, the peace community with the Black Lives Matter movement, because
It's
injustice,
all about social justice.
it is, and war is directly linked with the black community and the minority communities, because they are the servicemen that are really, I don't know if there's a majority of them in the military, but there's an awful lot.
It's disproportionate to the population.
Right.
You're all
And so we've been trying different ways to get more youth out there, and that'd be one of them, to have an interfaith peace event like this.
Mhm.
And Colleen said that the reason she sent this to me was because it's something like what I did in creating the Central Minnesota Peace Fair, which is now in its 5th year. It's up in Brainerd this year, rather than here.
Tomorrow. Today's the 17th of July, so it's going to be held tomorrow.
Right, it's going to be tomorrow up in
It'll
Brainerd.
be after the fact when you see this, but
Right. Songs about peace, a presentation of pictures and messages written by students, about what peace means to them. Getting youth involved is where it needs to start. The younger you learn to be compassionate and respectful, the better off the world will be. I hope that we will raise consciousness, help people understand that yes, this is a wonderful, diverse community, and that we can celebrate it and not be divided or fall prey to any of the divisive rhetoric going on. So, and then it also says, the more people from different cultural and faith backgrounds interact and listen to each other, the sooner they realize we're all neighbors and we all want the same things in life.
The picture of the children singing is, the children are just so beautiful, and they're many of them are wearing their native clothes. I don't want to call them costumes because
Right.
for them it's
No, that's
their
their native outfits, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
So, and there's something about children too that brings people together. You can't help but smile at a beautiful child
Right.
performing.
And some people may have missed my last public forum, which was not this past meeting on the 6th of June, because I missed that one. But the one before that, the last meeting in May, I read this to the council. Quote, I'm well aware, as anyone who has seen Trevor Aronson's book, The Terror Factory, inside the FBI's Manufacture War on Terrorism, that a large percentage of the persons, mostly Muslim, being convicted would not have ever committed any crime if not pushed to do so by FBI informants and undercovers. Some smaller percentage might have. Ironically and counterproductively, the U.S. military cannot have the global war on terror be seen as a war against Muslims, but the FBI and other homeland security agencies are doing precisely that, waging a war on Muslims, as it really is the only way they can participate and effectively justify their share of the burgeoning war budget. This has nothing to do with reducing the level of terrorism, as the United States and NATO initially supported the foreign jihadists fighting to topple the Syrian government. In other words, they never considered that some of the jihadists would return home and turn against their home countries. But that is the same as when the United States came up creating the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and now ISIS, and the same as when Israel created Hamas. The use of terrorist proxy forces divide and conquer tactics is all about effective manipulation in order for the U.S. to achieve its stated goal of full spectrum dominance over the world. Unquote. That's Colleen Rowley, former FBI whistleblower of the FBI, and she is also was the 2002 Times Magazine Person of the Year. She wrote that, and I made a mistake at the beginning where I said where I read this. It wasn't at the council meeting. I'm remembering now, it was at the legislative update that was held at City Hall for Senator Paul Gazelka
Oh, yes.
and Representative Ron Kresha, where constituents could speak to them. That's where I read this.
Yes.
I just got mixed up there temporarily. And on every one of the emails that I get from Colleen, it says this at the bottom, quote, power is always dangerous, power attracts the worst and corrupts the best. Edward Abbey wrote that. And okay, the national lawyers, this is getting back to what I read at the legislative update. The National Lawyers Guild of Minnesota on June 3rd wrote, our hearts are sad tonight because 3 young Somali men who never actually hurt a soul were convicted of serious crimes they didn't commit. They are scapegoats for the excuse that the United States needs to continue a permanent war state. Conspiracy to commit murder outside the United States is the crime that the United States should be charged with, not 3 young men who never even left Hennepin County. And that was because of the 3 young Somali teenagers at the time, and I think they're adults now, but they were teenagers when they got persuaded by the FBI informants and helpers to go down that route.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's wrong to
Absolutely.
try to entrap people. I just think,
There is a law against it.
well, and they don't cross the fine line, so it's not technically illegal, but I don't like the idea of it at all.
I don't
If they can't capture criminals the honest, old-fashioned way, they shouldn't be doing it at all.
Well, they
There's
should be creating criminals.
Right,
You know, or
exactly.
fictional
Or
criminals.
pre-crime stuff. This
Yeah.
is pre-crime.
Yeah.
And we're arresting people for pre-crime.
Yeah.
Remember that show? There was-
Yeah, The Minority Report.
I can't remember, maybe was that the name of it?
Yeah, it was a movie about Pete. They had the central bureau had,
CIA.
was it the CIA? They had people who could look into the future.
Yeah, and see a pre-crime.
Right, and see if somebody was going to commit a crime at some point. So then they would go arrest them before they
Right.
committed the crime.
Based on their thought pattern.
Yeah,
This isn't far off.
not at all.
And there's a lot of information we're going to discuss that we'll talk about this more in depth. And then I reminded them what Pope Francis recently said. The deeper question is why there are so many migrants now. The initial problems are the wars in the Middle East and Africa. Coming back to the migrant issue, the worst form of welcome is to ghettoize them. On the contrary, it's necessary to integrate them. Today, I don't think that there's a fear of Islam as much as, but of ISIS and its war of conquest, which is partly drawn from Islam. It is true that the idea of conquest is inherent in the soul of Islam. However, it's also possible to interpret the objective in Matthew's gospel, where Jesus sends his disciples to all nations in terms of the same idea of conquest. Go ye into all the world.
And preach the gospel.
Yeah. Spread your form of religion. Well, that's what Islam is telling their constituents to do as well,
Right.
their followers. Christians and Muslims used to live together and must learn to do so again. We are all equal as sons and daughters of God and with our personal dignity. However, everyone must have the freedom to externalize his or her own faith. If a Muslim woman wishes to wear a veil, she must be able to do so. Similarly, if a Catholic wishes to wear a cross, people must be free to profess their faith at the heart of their own culture, not merely at its margins. And the night, this is from Tuesday, May 31st, I got a memo from Mary Bedouin, who is in the WAM organization that I am also a member of, Women Against Military Madness. It's a rally to defend entrapped Somali youth, and it says, entrapping and trying these Muslim youth is one of the most shameful and heartbreaking things that has happened in Minnesota. Please come to the rally. As the defense rests its case and the jury begins to deliberate, join us outside the federal courthouse to show support for 3 young men and their families entrapped by the FBI. Guled Omar, Abdirahman Daud, and Mohammed Farah are beloved sons, students, and breadwinners now facing potential life sentences for a case manufactured by an informant who was paid $100,000. Join us to denounce the Department of Justice's entrapment, surveillance, and terror baiting of the Somali community. This case is part of an ongoing organized attack against the East African community, facing rising levels of Islamophobia, xenophobia, racism, and government repression. Hear from family members of these young men and community leaders speaking out against this unjust trial. And had it not been that I was 100 miles away, I would have gladly gone to this meeting, but it was in the evening too that they were doing this, starting at 5 o'clock. And that gets difficult for me to go to evening stuff because I get tired. And on the similar note here, this is an article written by Charles Pierce, June 8th of 2016, the FBI's plan to fight ISIS, now with less Fourth Amendment. And I'm going to let Theresa read just the highlighted parts of that. That goes into it in more detail.
This is Charles Pierce, June 8th, 2016. Meanwhile, back in the deep state, the shenanigans continue, largely unabated. As the New York Times informs us, the FBI is stepping up its efforts to entrap shoeless vagrants into fanciful plots for the purpose of juicing up the old batting average. Undercover operations, once seen as a last resort, are now used in about 2 of every 3 prosecutions involving people suspected of supporting the Islamic State, a sharp rise in the span of just 2 years, according to a New York Times analysis. Charges have been brought against nearly 90 Americans believed to be linked to the group. The increase in the number of these operations, these secret operations, which put operatives in the middle of purported plots, has come with little public or congressional scrutiny, and the stings rely on FBI guidelines that predate the rise of the Islamic State. While FBI officials say they are careful to avoid illegally entrapping subjects, their undercover operatives are far from bystanders. In recent investigations from Florida to California, Agents have helped people suspected of being extremists acquire weapons, scope out bombing targets, and find the best routes to Syria to join the Islamic State, records show. I've said this before. Sooner or later, something is going to go wrong, and one of these FBI-designed plots is going to go sideways, and real people are going to become really dead. Massive ass covering will thereupon ensue, which the appropriate investigative institutions will be unable to unravel. The lack of any kind of oversight is particularly appalling. They're manufacturing terrorism cases, said Michael German, a former undercover agent with the FBI, who researches national security law at New York University's Brennan Center for Justice. In many of the recent prosecutions, he said, these people are 5 steps away from being a danger to the United States. Karen J. Greenberg, the director of the Center on National Security at Fordham University, said undercover operations had become the norm for the FBI in the most recent Islamic State cases, with little debate or understanding of how the Bureau actually conducts its investigations, especially its online stings. I think the FBI, this is quoting now, I think the FBI is really going down the wrong path with a lot of these ISIS cases, she said, using a common acronym for the Islamic State, also known as ISIL. ISIS is the new super powerful boogeyman that's too powerful for a free nation to contain. First it was drugs, then it was Al-Qaeda, now it's these folks in their Toyota pickups that have forced the FBI to perform some burlesque theater on people who don't know any better. And then we have it.
Now, my friend John Kiriakou of the CIA, who was jailed, imprisoned for 3.5 years, and he didn't really leak any classified documents or anything. General Petraeus did, though, to his lover.
Yeah, really friend.
Okay, so John Kiriakou wrote, Obama, and this is recently, June 13th, Obama should demand FBI Director James Comey's resignation today. I didn't have time to print this, so I have to look at my phone. Sunday's terrorist attack on a gay nightclub in Orlando should be the cause for all Americans to come together. This wasn't just an attack on the gay community, it was an attack on all of us. It will, of course, lead to the predictable arguments about gun control, Islam, mental health, and immigration. Congress will offer thoughts and prayers and nothing will change. But something ought to change, and quickly. This is the consistent failure of the FBI to do its job, to infiltrate domestic and foreign terrorist groups, and to prevent attacks on United States soil. This is not something new. The FBI has been incompetent for a very long time. Orlando shooter Omar Mateen reportedly had planned the massacre for a long time, according to CNN. Over the past several weeks, he had attempted to buy military-grade body armor. He had successfully purchased a Glock semi-automatic handgun and a long gun, and the FBI did nothing. The FBI knew that Mateen had worked for GS4 Secure Solutions, one of the world's largest private security companies, for which he had apparently passed a background investigation. FBI officials knew this because they had interviewed Mateen in 2013 and 14. The interviews were conducted because he had expressed support for a suicide bomber, and still the FBI did nothing. FBI Director James Comey said Monday that the FBI is highly confident that Mateen was radicalized, probably by viewing extremist material on the internet. Even after National Security Agency had swallowed up every piece of metadata on the entire internet and presumably had its Craig computers analyze and pass actionable intelligence onto the FBI, it did nothing. There's a long-standing pattern after Saeed Farouk killed 14 people in a shooting in San Bernardino, California. Last year, the FBI was aware that Farouk had been in contact with terrorism suspects, but that its agents had done nothing about it. I wrote in my book, The Reluctant Spy, My Secret Life and the CIA's War on Terror, of an FBI incident in which I personally witnessed FBI incompetence in Pakistan in 2002. This is backing up everything basically and more than what Colleen Rowley has said about the FBI. When I was the chief of CIA counterterrorism operations there, I was part of a team that raided the Taliban embassy in Peshawar that year. As part of our haul, we confiscated a set of file folders that contained more than a year's worth of embassy phone bills. Those bills showed hundreds of calls from the Taliban to phone numbers all across the United States: Buffalo, Kansas City, Sacramento, Tampa, Detroit, and elsewhere. Those calls ended abruptly on September 10th, 2001, then started up again slowly on September 16th. So ended just before the 9/11 attack and then started up shortly after, a week or so later. I wanted to know who was receiving these calls. Why were they receiving calls from the Taliban? It was possible that they were Afghan nationals in the United States with legitimate consular issues, but it was equally plausible that they were working for or with the Taliban in some way, possibly against the United States. Could they have been spies? Were they sleepers tasked with living quiet lives until called upon to carry out an attack? We didn't know. I reported all of this to the CIA at headquarters and was told that it was an FBI issue. I then sent the original phone bills to the FBI, and then I returned to my regular business. Months passed. I returned to CIA headquarters, and in the summer of 2002, I ran into an FBI agent whom I had worked with in Pakistan. What happened to those Taliban phone bills? I asked. The FBI was waiting for Pashto translators to become available. Pashto translators? I asked. Those bills were written in English. That's how I knew what they were. I resigned from the CIA a year and a half later. Again, I ran into a former FBI agent from Pakistan. Whatever happened to those Taliban phone bills? Oh, he said they ended up being shipped to an FBI storage facility in suburban Maryland. Just like in the final scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark, the box of phone bills was never even opened. We'll never know if there was or is a threat to Americans originating with the Taliban or Taliban sympathizers. We'll never know why those Americans were in contact with the Taliban immediately before and immediately after September 11th. The same thing is still happening. The FBI's ongoing long-term incompetence has led to the deaths of far too many Americans. San Bernardino and Orlando are only the beginning. If the FBI can't do its job, if its only counterterrorism successes are when it entraps hapless idiots who don't know any better and who never have had any intention of committing a terrorist act, it should be scrapped. At the very least, President Obama should immediately demand the FBI director's resignation. That should happen today. John Kirioko is a former CIA counterterrorism operations officer and former senior investigator for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
What a mess.
And I thought I brought it with, but I'm searching for it in here and I can't find it, but I want to read to you what Colleen Rowley said directly following the FBI, or the Orlando shootings, because it's profound. Everything, she says, is profound, actually.
But she's an insider, so she has a very good point of view, vantage point as well.
We as Minnesotans don't highlight and give her as much open mic, so to speak, as what we should. She is one of the best ever. I'm just gonna scroll through here and find this. Oh, I know where it'll be. It'll be on my, I'll find it quicker on my screenshots here. Just one moment, folks. I'm gonna let Theresa read this while I find this. This is written by Mary Bedouin of the Women Against Military Madness, and that came, well, I'll just let you read it.
Okay. I posted this comment on the Morrison County Register. Thank you, protesters, for standing up to backward, primitive bigotry. I am not Muslim, immigrant, refugee, or person of color, but I would not enter your county or towns and patronize your businesses unless I knew that there were people living there who are kind, fair-minded, and welcoming. That says this is a great deal.
So, actually, because we're allowing these Islamophobic and Sharia-phobic speakers to come here, it's stifling our economic growth. People like Mary Bedouin won't even pass through here. When she's headed north, the only reason she'd come in this area is because she knows there's people like Theresa and I and Herb Davis and Retha Dooley and Doug Olson and
Cody.
Kat Barris and the number of people that have gotten out there and protested against this hate speech that's happening. We are all for free speech. But when speech is so divisive and so derogatory against a particular race or a particular religion, that's where we get into trouble in this country. And we're not saying don't allow it, but we are asking people to reconsider, how is this helping our community? How is it not driving forward bigotry and hatred and future crimes?
Mm-hmm.
How is it not?
And excluding people of good will and good intention.
And on that note, while I continue to search for that, I'm looking for Colleen, I'll let you read this, because this is what happened up in North Dakota following. We're not saying that Usama Dekduk was hurt by this young man, but he may have been. And even if he didn't go to this event, he probably heard the Islamophobic crap that was flying all around that area before and during and after Usama Dekduk spoke his Islamophobic stuff.
This hate speech really.
This guy admits to committing a hate crime. And there is hate crime in North Dakota. There's not here, but there should be. We don't have a hate crime law here. So I'll let you read that.
Okay, by the way, just to catch you up, Usama Dekduk is an Egyptian Coptic Christian pastor who has been speaking in the area against Islam, essentially saying that Islam is the problem. A man who set fire to a Somali restaurant in Grand Forks, North Dakota, pleads guilty to hate crime. Fargo. On May 19, 2016, Matthew Goost, 25, pleaded guilty today to a federal hate crime for setting fire to a Somali restaurant in Grand Forks, North Dakota, announced Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General Vanita Gupta, head of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, and U.S. Attorney Christopher C. Myers of the District of North Dakota. According to his plea agreement, Goost admitted that he set the fire December 8, 2015, in order to intimidate and interfere with the Somali employees and patrons of the Juba Cafe. Early that morning, he drove to a gas station and purchased a small amount of gasoline, which he used to fill a 40-ounce beer bottle, turning it into a Molotov cocktail. Goost then drove to the cafe, donned a face mask, punched a hole through the front window of the cafe, lit the Molotov cocktail, threw it through the window, and fled. The Molotov cocktail exploded on impact, creating an explosion and fire that engulfed Juba Cafe and caused at least $90,000 worth of damages. Goost pleaded guilty to an arson charge as well as to the hate crime charge. He was charged by information with those two counts on March 20th, 2016. He had earlier been indicted by a grand jury for using a destructive device in the commission of a crime. That charge will be dismissed as part of his plea agreement. We will not tolerate violence that attempts to divide us by targeting individuals based on their national origin, said Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General Gupta. The Civil Rights Division will continue to bring justice to those who attempt to intimidate and drive out members of our community. This case exemplifies the strong partnership between local, state, and federal authorities working together to ensure the rights of all members of our community are protected from criminal conduct motivated by hate, said U.S. Attorney Myers. In such circumstances, the response from all levels of law enforcement in North Dakota will be swift and certain. Investigating these types of attacks, I'm quoting, will always remain a priority for the FBI, said Special Agent in Charge Richard T. Thornton of the FBI's Minneapolis Division. Attacks such as these have no place in our society, and those who would commit them should know that they will be aggressively pursued by the FBI. There is no place for hate in our communities, and these targeted acts of violence won't be tolerated, said Special Agent in Charge Jim Modzelewski of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives in St. Paul, Minnesota Field Division. ATF will continue to diligently investigate these crimes to ensure that all of our residents feel safe and welcomed. Goost is scheduled to be sentenced on August 29, 2016. The hate crime charge carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison, while the arson charge carries a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. This case was investigated by the Grand Forks Police Department, the FBI, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. The case is being prosecuted by Assistant U.S. Attorney Megan A. Healy of the District of North Dakota, and trial attorney Dana Mulhauser of the Civil Rights Division's Criminal Section.
Okay, I found what I was looking for that Colleen said right after the Orlando shooting. She put this up on Facebook. And it's in response to after Sandy Hook, we said never again, then we let 998 mass shootings happen, and it's a map of where all the hate crime shootings have occurred. Most Americans still do not connect the dots that increasing violence occurring domestically, mass shooting, active shooters, hate crimes, and acts of terror, which frankly all blur together, are not only blowback from the natural result of a war culture that glorifies war and war violence in the form of violent movies, video games, and military culture. I warned the FBI director in February 2003 that this would happen and that he and the FBI would be helpless to stop it if the United States went ahead and launched a war on Iraq. Now this is from a fellow whose name is, he's a CIA veteran, Robert David Steele. He recently said, I will tell you that here in the United States, every terrorist incident we have had has been a false flag or has been an informant pushed on by the FBI. Now what he may mean by that is that it's all been blowback related.
Well, we know that. I mean, I think that we're at least beginning to catch on to the reality that terrorist attacks on U.S. soil or European soil are reactions to American aggression in many cases.
I have read this for the city hall, for my public forum, so I'm just going to skip that because I can see we're not going to get all this in.
Right.
We have 30 minutes left only. Time goes fast when you're having fun.
Yeah.
I'm going to read some very interesting stuff that ties in to what we've been talking about. And I'm going to kind of mix it up with what Bruce Fine said, what Chris Hedges has said, and others have said along the way here. This is American Intervention Creates Enemies in Danger by Bruce Fine. The United States predictably followed the model of its Roman precursor. First, we fought in self-defense against the British. Then we fought in defense against the Allies in World War I. Then we invented allies to defend, for example, Vietnam, Kuwait, or Somalia. And then we began to fight for the sake of fighting, unable to determine victory or international terrorism or otherwise, beyond the United States Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart's memorable definition of vicinity. I know it when I see it. Like its predecessors, the American Empire refuses to entertain the idea that our endless, gratuitous foreign interventions have created enemies that would not otherwise have attacked us. Upton Sinclair explained the fierce resistance to the truth, and I believe this applies to every single soldier, past, present, and future. It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. I think that's how military soldiers get tricked into doing nothing or obeying unconstitutional orders. Trillions of dollars, wealth, great power, and social status lie behind our military-industrial terrorism MIT complex. It thrives on perpetual war and concocted fears of danger and existential threats. Since the Americana Empire took hold after World War II, none have dared to insinuate that our chronic, objectless military inventions in the Middle East in support of brutal, corrupt, oppressive regimes have provoked retaliation by the oppressed. He forgot about us, though. We've been telling him. We have provided material assistance to the states featuring repression, torture, and extrajudicial killings. For example, the Shah of Iran, the House of Saud in Saudi Arabia, or Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak. 2 fatwas issued by Osama bin Laden before 9/11 protested the presence of our troops in Saudi Arabia near the Muslim holy cities of Mecca and Medina, not our freedom of speech or religion, elections, due process, or gender equality. Think of the analogy between a bayonet and a hornet's nest. The nest will not harm you if you leave it undisturbed. But if you smash it to bits with a bayonet, the hornets will sting you. The United States would be vastly freer, wealthier, and safer if we withdrew all our troops from the Middle East for redeployment at home to protect our borders, our shores, and our skies. Israel commands more than enough power to fend for itself. With vastly less military might in 1948, Israel handily defeated Egypt, Iraq, and Syria, and Palestinian Arabs combined. And we should cease selling arms or providing non-humanitarian aid of any type to the region. Our warfare state, nursed and fueled by the military-industrial complex, industrial terrorism, MIT complex, is the great destroyer of liberty. Its malignant children have been the surveillance state, national bankruptcy, secret government, and the evisceration of constitutional checks and balances.
You know, I've said it for years and years and years, but we just leave them alone.
Right.
It's like a scientific principle that what you observe is changed by the fact that you're observing it.
And now this is written by Chris Hedges, who's actually an ordained Presbyterian minister and was mentored by our own Senator Eugene McCarthy.
Okay. March 30th, 2016. Violence begets violence. How sometimes the U.S. acts like the Islamic State. Revenge is the psychological engine of war. Victims are the blood currency. Their corpses are used to sanctify acts of indiscriminate murder. Those defined as the enemy and targeted for slaughter are rendered inhuman. They are not worthy of empathy or justice. Pity and grief are felt exclusively for our own. We vow to eradicate the dehumanized mass that embodies absolute evil. The maimed and dead in Brussels or Paris and the maimed and dead in Raqqa or Sirte perpetuate the same dark lusts. We all are Islamic State. That's a huge statement to make. From violence, only violence is born, Primo Levi wrote. Following a pendular action that, as time goes by, rather than dying down, becomes more frenzied. The tit-for-tat game of killing will not end until exhaustion, until the culture of death breaks us emotionally and physically. We use our drones, warplanes, missiles, and artillery to rip apart walls and ceilings, blow out windows, and kill or wound those inside. Our enemies pack peroxide-based explosives in suitcases or suicide vests and walk into airport terminals, concert halls, cafes, or subways and blow us up, often along with themselves. If they had our technology of death, they would do it more efficiently, but they do not. Their tactics are cruder, but morally they are the same as us. T.E. Lawrence called this cycle of violence the rings of sorrow. The Christian religion embraces the concept of holy war as fanatically as Islam does. Our crusades are matched by the concept of jihad. Once religion is used to sanctify murder, there are no rules. It is a battle between light and dark, good and evil, Satan and God. Rational discourse is banished, and the sleep of reason, as Goya said, brings forth the monsters. Flags, patriotic songs, a deification of the warrior, and sentimental dribble drown out reality. We communicate in empty cliches and mindless patriotic absurdities. Mass culture is used to reinforce the lie that we are the true victims. It recreates the past to conform to the national heroic myth. We alone are said to possess virtue and courage. We alone have the right to revenge. We are hypnotized into a communal somnolence, a state-induced blindness. Those we fight, lacking our industrial machines of death, kill up close. But killing remotely does not make us less morally deformed. Long-distance killing, epitomized by drone operators at Air Force bases within the United States, who go home for dinner, is as depraved. These technicians make the vast machinery of death operate with a terrifying clinical sterility. They depersonalize industrial war. They are the little Eichmanns. This organized bureaucracy of killing is the most enduring legacy of the Holocaust. The mechanized, rational, impersonal, and sustained mass destruction of human beings, organized and administered by states, legitimized and set into motion by scientists and jurists, sanctioned and popularized by academics and intellectuals, has become a staple of our civilization, the last perilous and often repressed heritage of the millennium. Omar Bartok wrote in Murder in Our Midst, the Holocaust, Industrial Killing and Representation. We torture kidnapped captives, many held for years in black sites. We carry out targeted assassinations of so-called high-value targets. We abolish civil liberties. We drive millions of families from their homes. Those who oppose us do the same. They torture every head, replicating the execution style of the Christian Crusaders with their own brand of savagery. They rule as despots. Pain for pain, blood for blood, horror for horror. There is a fearsome symmetry to the madness. It is justified by the same religious perversion. It is the same abandonment of what it means to be humane and just. The killing and torture, the more they endure, contaminate the perpetrators and the society that condones their actions. They sever the professional inquisitors and killers from the capacity to feel. They feed the death instinct. They expand the moral injury of war. 22 veterans of the U.S. military service commit suicide every day. They do it without an explosives belt, but they share with suicide bombers the overpowering urge to be rid of the world and the sordid role they had in it. It is better to suffer certain injustices than to commit them. Albert Camus, like Immanuel Kant, understood. But the politicians, pundits, and the mass culture dismiss such wisdom as weakness. Who are we to condemn the indiscriminate murder of civilians? Have we forgotten our bombing of German and Japanese cities in World War II that left 800,000 civilian women, children, and men dead? What about those families we obliterated in Dresden, 135,000 dead? Tokyo, 97,000 dead. Hiroshima, 80,000 dead. And Nagasaki, 66,000 dead. What about the 3 million civilian dead we left behind in Vietnam? We dropped 32 tons of bombs per hour in North Vietnam between 1965 and 1968, hundreds of Hiroshimas. And yet, as Nick Turse writes in his book, Kill Anything That Moves, The Real American War in Vietnam, this tonnage does not count the millions of gallons of chemical defoliants, millions of pounds of chemical gases, and endless canisters of napalm, cluster bombs, high explosive shells, and daisy cutter bombs that obliterated everything within a 10-foot football field diameter. Anti-personnel rockets, high explosive rockets, incendiary rockets, grenades by the millions, and myriad different kinds of mines. Have we forgotten the millions who died in our wars and proxy wars in the Philippines, Congo, Laos, Cambodia, Guatemala, Indonesia, El Salvador, and Nicaragua?
And then I don't have the last page of that, so. We're limited on time here, so yeah, he's really a profound speaker and writer. Chris Hedges is one of the best. 15 minutes left. Wow, we're not going to get through even half of this stack. Now we're ready to go for next time.
That's right.
This is profound, and I sent this to Todd Pierce because he's always involved with things that are involved in the military and drone bombings, and of course he's a military judge advocate general, and he defended people at Guantanamo Bay. He was very interested to hear this. This is like really important. Pakistani court, and this is written Thursday, May 9th. 2013. Pakistani court declares United States drone strikes in the country's tribal belt illegal. Judges say the strikes must be declared a war crime as they kill innocent people. A Pakistani court has declared that the United States drone strikes in the country's tribal belt are illegal and has directed the government to move a resolution against the attacks in the United Nations. In what activists said was a historic division, the Peshawar High Court issued the verdict against the strikes by CIA-operated spy planes in response to 4 petitions that contended the attacks killed civilians and caused collateral damage. Chief Justice Dost Mohammed Khan, who headed a 2-judge bench that heard the petitions, ruled that the drone strikes were illegal, inhumane, and a violation of the UN Charter on Human Rights. The court said the strikes must be declared a war crime as they killed innocent people. And why is this important? Because we're training drone pilots by the droves out here at Camp Ripley and all over the country, but a lot of them are trained out here
Yeah.
because this is the largest live fire exercise military training base in the Midwest. And what I'm concerned is going to happen eventually is that our soldiers on the lower rung of the totem pole, so to speak, are going to be indicted for war crimes for doing what they've been commanded to do, which may be found and held illegal in the future as a war crime. Now, this is important. An Army captain sues Obama, says he lacks authority to fight ISIL. This is May 4, 2016 article in the Associated Press. An Army captain sued President Barack Obama on Wednesday, alleging that he doesn't have the proper congressional authority to wage war against Islamic State militants in Iraq and Syria. Captain Nathaniel Michael Smith filed the suit in United States District Court in Washington as the president is deploying more special operations to the region. And a day after a Navy SEAL was killed in combat in Iraq, the third since a U.S.-led coalition launched its campaign against the Islamic State in the summer of 2014. Smith supports the war on military and on moral grounds and considers the Islamic State an army of butchers, but he wants the court to tell Obama that he needs to ask the Congress for a new authorization for the use of military force. Smith is asking the court to find that the war against ISIS violates the War Powers Resolution because Congress has not declared war or given the president specific authorization to fight it. The lawlessness has made it impossible for Captain Smith to determine whether his present mission is inconsistent with his oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, thus requiring him to seek an independent determination on this matter from the court, the suit said. Members of the military are obligated to refuse to follow an order that is illegal under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. If they follow unlawful ones, they risk punishment.
Yeah, they're responsible.
And this is an Army chaplain resigns over the drone wars, and this is May 12th of 2016, so fairly recently. And I'll just let you read the highlighted parts there, and that's on the next page as well.
Okay.
His letter to the president.
U.S. Army Reserve Chaplain Captain Christopher John Antal resigned from the U.S. Army Reserves on April 12th in opposition to U.S. policies regarding militarized drones, nuclear weapons, and preventive war. Antal stated that he could not serve as a chaplain for an empire and could not reconcile his duty to protect and defend America and its constitutional democracy, and his commitment to the core principles of his religious faith, including justice, equity, and compassion, and the inherent worth and dignity of every person, with policies of the United States. Subject, resignation and protest. So this is the letter. Dear Mr. President, I hereby resign my commission as an officer in the United States Army. I resign because I refuse to support U.S. armed drone policy. The executive branch continues to claim the right to kill anyone, anywhere on earth, at any time, for secret reasons, based on secret evidence, in a secret process undertaken by unidentified officials. I refuse to support this policy of unaccountable killing. I resign because I refuse to support U.S. nuclear weapon policy. The executive branch continues to invest billions of dollars into nuclear weapons, which threaten the existence of humankind and the earth. I refuse to support this policy of terror and mutually assured destruction. I resign because I refuse to support U.S. policy of preventive war, permanent military supremacy, and global power projection. The executive branch continues to claim extra-constitutional authority and impunity from international law. I refuse to support this policy of imperial overreach. I resign because I refuse to serve as an empire chaplain. I cannot reconcile these policies with my sworn duty to protect and defend America and our constitutional democracy, or my covenantal commitment to the core principles of my religious faith. These principles include justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, a free and responsible search for truth, and the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Respectfully submitted, Christopher John Anton. Good for him.
A preview for next time, because we're running out of time here, we're going to be talking about pastors need to talk more about politics, not less. And this premier article is written by Max Lucado. And another article, 10 minutes left. Chris Hedges, why many of America's liberal churches are committing ethical suicide. That's a kind of a short one. I wish we'd have time to get at that today. Maybe we will. Okay, so let's put that there. We're also going to be talking about the stealth expansion of a secret U.S. drone base in Africa. Chalabi Airfield is a little more than a gray sponge in a tan wasteland. Okay, so Chalabi Airfield is taking the place of the one at Djibouti, if I remember right. Anyway, we're going to talk about that, because that's important. Just to remind people with the upcoming election that our government is spending more than 54% of every dollar contributed by every single taxpayer on war and making war.
And in the meantime, children are going to bed hungry.
$622.6 billion goes to the military. Now get this, veterans benefits are $75.4 billion, that's only 7%. And our education budget is less than that, it's $72.8 billion at 6%. Why in the world would any government spend 10 times more
To kill people in other
to
countries.
kill people and blow things up than on educating our kids?
Yes.
And everything else is way lower. Medicare and health, 5%. International affairs, 4%. Energy and environment, 4%. Social security, unemployment, labor, 3%. Science, 3%. Transportation, 2%.
It's upside down.
It's completely upside down. So we'll be talking about that. And along with that, we're also going to talk about, but I want people to know about this, the United States infrastructure is short $1.44 trillion through 2025. And every single household in this country is, from 2016 through 2025, each household will lose $3,400 annually because of infrastructure deficiencies, the engineer group said. So we'll be talking about that. Maybe we'll get to this one yet from Chris Hedges on the churches are committing ethical suicide, but we have to talk about Donald Trump.
Okay.
We don't have to. Bruce Fein is talking about Donald Trump. And along with talking about Donald Trump, this article by Bruce Fein called Donald Trump Will Destroy the Constitution. It's interesting to note because he bragged Mr. Trumpeter bragged on how one of his main supporters in the beginning was Sheriff Arpaio. Remember that?
No, I don't.
From Phoenix? Well, ACLU comment on Sheriff Arpaio contempt ruling. A federal court has found Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio and his top deputies in contempt for repeatedly violating court orders to stop racially profiling Latinos as part of unlawful enforcement operations targeting immigrants. So here's Trump bragging that one of his main supporters is Sheriff Arpaio, who is in contempt of court for disobeying.
For unlawfully targeting people on a racial basis.
The ruling stems from an American Civil Liberties Union lawsuit, Ortega Melendez v. Arpaio, in which a federal court ruled that Arpaio's office profiled and illegally detained Latinos, violating their constitutional rights, and ordered a significant overhaul of the agency policies practices. The civil contempt of court hearings arose after Arpaio and his top deputies repeatedly flouted the court orders. The court has found that Sheriff Arpaio intentionally and repeatedly violated court orders. His recalcitrance ends here. Strong remedies are needed to protect the community's rights, starting with internal investigations that root out and punish misconduct. Willing or not, the sheriff will be made to comply with the law. So Trumpeter can brag about the people that endorse him, but certainly doesn't have a very good one in the hymn, does he?
No, he is not.
And then I'm going to let you read the highlighted areas here in this article by Bruce Fine.
Bruce Fine. Donald Trump will destroy the Constitution, is the headline. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump is a one-man wrecking squad against the Constitution. Among other things, Mr. Trump has taken up arms against the 8th Amendment, prohibition of torture, the 5th and 14th Amendment requirements of due process, the First Amendment's protection of religious freedom, the Article 6 prohibition of religious test oaths, the Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 proscriptions of presidential wars, and the War Crimes Act of 1996 that implements international law. The candidate, Mr. Trump, reserves his nuclear arsenal for freedom of speech. He would close down the internet because some evil people might be influenced by its content to commit terrorism. According to the FBI, terrorist crimes in the U.S. constitute 0.00005% of all violent crimes in 2015. Under that standard, the Bible should be banned because some might be influenced to imitate its many grisly narratives of mass violence or ethnic cleansing. The Scarlet Letter should be banned because some readers might be influenced to commit adultery. A Tale of Two Cities should be banned because some might be influenced to resort to the guillotine. Indeed, virtually all great works of fiction and nonfiction should be banned because of a conceivable influencing on a bad deed. Mr. Trump sneers at defenders of free speech as foolish people. He insinuates that the world would be much better off without it. For Mr. Trump, life is not about thinking, it's about gratifying every reptilian instinct befitting a nation of savages. Very well said. He vows to torture Muslims far beyond waterboarding. He vows to murder the girlfriends and families of suspected Muslim terrorists. He champions surveillance of mosques in the United States and the establishment of a database for Muslim citizens. He would prohibit any Muslim immigration or visitation.
Okay, we're going to get through a little bit of this, and we might even have to finish on the next one, but this article is Chris Hedges, Why Many of America's Liberal Churches Are Committing Ethical Suicide. By the way, I want to tell people so they can research this in the meantime, we are going to talk about this next time. It's called the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, Get the Data Drone Wars. This is every drone strike that the United States has ever done anywhere on planet Earth. Get the Data, a list of U.S. air and drone strikes, Afghanistan 2016. It's thebureauinvestigates.com. You can look it up because we will be discussing that. The number of adults in mainline Protestant churches, Presbyterian, Unitarian Universalist, Lutheran, Methodist, Episcopal, Congregationalist, decreased from about 41 million in 2007 to 36 million in 2014. According to the Pew Research Center, and an average of the age of the congregant is 52, so it's an older group.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church is also being decimated. Its decline has been exacerbated by its decades-long protection of sexual predators within the priesthood and the Vatican's relentless campaign, especially under John Paul II, to force out of the church priests, nuns, and lay leaders who focus their ministries on the poor and the oppressed. The Catholic Church, which has lost 3 million members over the last decade, has seen its hold on the United States population fall to 21% from 24. Mainline seminaries and divinity schools have been merging or closing, and enrollment at such schools has declined by 24% in the last decade. The self-identified religious institutions that thrive preach the perverted prosperity gospel. The message that magic Jesus will make you rich, respected, and powerful if you believe in him. Jesus, they claim, is an American capitalist, bigot, and ardent imperialist. These sects selectively lift passages from the Bible to justify the unjustifiable, including homophobia, war, racism against Muslims, and the death penalty. Yet there are more students, 2,067, at the Evangelical Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary alone than at the divinity schools and seminaries of Yale, Harvard, Union, Vanderbilt, and Chicago, whose combined enrollment is 1,537.
Oh my gosh.
The doctrine these sects preach is Christian heresy. The Christian faith, as in the 1930s under Germany's pro-Nazi Christian church, is being distorted to sanctify nationalism, unregulated capitalism, and militarism. The mainstream church, which refuses to denounce these heretics as heretics, a decision made in the name of tolerance, tacitly gives these sects credibility and squanders the prophetic voice of the church. Don't you think?
Oh, absolutely.
I'll let you continue on right here.
Um,
Oh, wait.
Okay. Kevin Cruz, in his book One Nation Under God, How Corporate America Invented Christian America, details how industrialists in the 1930s and 1940s poured money and resources into an effort to silence the social witness of the mainstream church, which was home to many radicals, socialists, and proponents of the New Deal. These corporatists promoted and funded a brand of Christianity which is today dominant, that conflates faith with free enterprise and American exceptionalism. The rich are rich, this creed goes, not because they are greedy or privileged, not because they use their power to their own advantage, not because they oppress the poor and the vulnerable, but because they are blessed. And if we have enough faith, this heretical form of Christianity claims God will bless the rest of us too. It is an inversion of the central message of the gospel. You don't need to spend 3 years at Harvard Divinity School, as I did, to figure that out. The liberal church committed suicide when it severed itself from radicalism. Radical Christians led the abolitionist movement, were active in the anti-imperialist league, participated in the bloody labor wars, fought for women's suffrage, formulated the social gospel, which included huge efforts to carry out prison reform and provide education to prisoners, and were engines in the civil rights and anti-war movements. Norman Thomas, a longtime leader of the Socialist Party of America, was a Presbyterian minister. These radicals generally were not embraced by the church hierarchy, which served as a bulwark of the establishment, but they kept the church vital and prophetic. They made it relevant and important to the oppressed, the poor, and to working men and women. Radicals were and are its hope. Those who no longer join parents' organizations, gardening and historical clubs, or fraternal orders, who do not show up at town hall or city council meetings, also no longer attend church. There is little given this cultural malaise, much of it driven by the constant availability of entertainment through the internet and electronic devices, that the church can do to blunt the public's retreat from public space. What remains of the church, if it is to survive as a social and cultural force, will see clergy and congregants leave sanctuaries to work in prisons, schools, labor halls, and homeless and women's shelters, form night basketball leagues, and participate in grassroots movements such as the anti-fracking struggle and the fight to raise the minimum wage. This shift will make it hard to financially maintain the massive and largely empty church edifices, and perhaps even the seminaries, but it will keep the church real and alive. I had a dinner a few months ago with fellow teachers in the prison where I work. We discovered to our surprise that every one of us had seminary degrees. During the rise of the American species of corporate fascism, what Sheldon Wolin called inverted totalitarianism, the liberal church, like the rest of the liberal establishment, looked the other way, while the poor and working men and women, especially those of color, were ruthlessly disempowered and impoverished. The church and liberals were as silent about the buildup of mass incarceration as they once were about lynching. The mainline church refused to confront and denounce the destructive force of corporate power. It placed its faith in institutions such as the Democratic Party that had long ceased to function as mechanisms of reform. The church, mirroring the liberal establishment, busied itself with charity, multiculturalism, and gender identity politics at the expense of justice, especially racial and economic justice. It retreated into a narcissistic how it is with me spirituality. Although the mainline church paid lip service to diversity, it never welcomed significant numbers of people of color or the marginalized into their sanctuaries. The Presbyterian church, for example, is 92% white. It pushed to the margins or sought to discredit liberation theology, which called out the evils of unfettered capitalism, white supremacy, and imperialism. The retreat from radicalism, in essence the abandonment of the vulnerable to the predatory forces of corporate capitalism, created a spiritual void filled by proto-fascist movements, that have usurped Christian symbols and provided a species of faith that is, at its core, a belief in magic. This Christian heresy is currently on display at Donald Trump and Ted Cruz political rallies.
That's absolutely true.
Yes. And finally, the mainline churches, by which we mean white denominations, are responsible for many of our greatest social ills, including white supremacy and patriarchy. If those parts of mainline Christianity need to die for renewal to take place, we need to learn how to embrace that. There is no resurrection without death.
And a last note I just want to say, and this is a personal statement from me, and it has nothing to do with Theresa, but I'm disappointed, to say the least, that's a mild term, that there isn't one local church here that's fighting for most of the causes that Theresa and I have stood up for and been out there on the edge for more than 5 years now.
Yeah.
There's not one church in town that speaks out against war, that speaks out against capitalism, the evils of Islamophobia, or any of the ills, including poverty, that plague this area.
Mm-hmm.
They're sitting in their little pews, and the pastor is staying within his little political, non-political confines of not addressing the stuff that really matters. And what's happening then is the people that are attending church are getting the message that everything is fine and dandy, and they get the bad news, and the only news and the only political stuff they're receiving is like the one article that we talked about from news pundits.
Right. Who are very, very biased.
And those people are not challenged with the goal of helping form someone's spirituality, and they're growing up, so to speak, within the church. The pastors are not doing their due diligence. They're not performing their job correctly if they're not talking about things that matter, like pastors in the past inspired people to be part of the labor
the
movement.
abolitionists and women's suffrage, yes.
And all these incredible movements that help define our nation, none of these pastors, locally or anywhere in our nation, are talking about these things.
So the only pastors who are really inspiring people are, for the most part, inspiring them to be fearful, to
Right.
be hateful, to be prejudiced. Yes.
Right, and we know from history that all governments fail, all countries, all nations fail, long after the church fails. And it is my humble opinion that our church is failing the people that are attending the churches.
I agree.
So we will talk about that more in depth in the future, and we're out of time.
And a little beyond, probably, as usual. But you know us, we get going, we get enthusiastic, and you can't shut us up. So we'll look forward to talking a little more on Can We Talk next time. And until then, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you later.